Now, January 6th is just one of the several topics discussed in last night's debate. The candidates sparred over several issues ranging from the Capitol riots to the economy and abortion. Here is some of what they had to say.
The idea that somehow we are this failing country. I never heard a president talk like this before.
I've never seen anybody lie like this guy. He lies.
Well, look, the greatest economy in the world. He's the only one who thinks that, I think. I don't know anybody else who thinks he had the greatest economy in the world.
We did a great job. We got a lot of credit for the economy, a lot of credit for the military, and no wars, and so many other things. Everything was rocking good.
If I'm elected, I'm going to restore Roe v. Wade.
He can take the life of the baby in the 9th month and even after birth, because some states, Democrat run, take it after birth.
That is simply not true.
Let's bring in CBS News political correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns. She's on the campaign trail with the former president in Chesapeake, Virginia. Caitlin, good to see you. First, before we get to the substance of the debate, how is the former president's team responding to the Supreme Court's decision today?
Hey, Lindsay, good to be with you. We actually just landed here from Atlanta. Now we're here in Virginia after that debate. There was a long line of people already standing outside this rally and 80-plus degrees here in Virginia to get in today. And a couple of things worth noting about how the Trump team is feeling. First, they're kind of in celebratory mode. We saw that last night. We're seeing that all through the day in terms of statements from the campaign. They believe that they really were able, in their words, to defeat Joe Biden in the debate. But what's significant about their first stop after that debate is that they're coming here to Virginia. Virginia was once considered a swing state, and after 2008 and onwards, Democrats have been really successful here. However, the Trump campaign has been arguing that Virginia is coming closer and closer into play. And what's significant about this appearance, especially today, is that former President Trump is going to be appearing on this stage behind me with current governor, Republican, Glenn Youngkin. And that's significant because when Glenn Youngkin ran a couple years ago, he distanced himself from Trump and tried to kind of thread the needle in Republican Party politics. Now he has embraced the former president, endorsed him, and is appearing at a rally with him today. That is a signal of some of these Republicans coming home to Trump. The Trump campaign has been arguing that they are consolidating the Republican Party base heading into this election. So we'll see kind of what this does in terms of moving any sort of needle here in Virginia, but certainly intending to send a message with this location of the rally tonight.
And Caitlin, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about some of the falsehoods the former president was allowed to say unchecked last night. What stood out to you?
Lindsay, what stood out to me especially was on the topic of abortion rights. This, of course, is a defining issue of this election. And Trump, as you played in the clip there actually leading into this, accused Democrats of wanting to support legislation that would allow abortions after birth. That's just not true because that would be considered murder. There is no state in the United States that allows for that. But what was interesting, though, Lindsay, about that exchange, it also underscored a weakness that Biden had in the debate. Abortion is the central, part of the central pitch that Democrats are making to voters, trying to gin up support, rev up the base on that issue. And there were two instances where Biden actually, whiffed on that. And so, he was asked about it and kind of went on this rambling statement. And that kind of underscored his weaknesses in last night's debate. Now, that's what I'm watching for, is kind of how people are responding to that particular portion.
All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you for making the plane and bringing that to us. Appreciate it. Let's bring in CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang now, who is at President Biden's rally in Raleigh, North Carolina. So first, Weijia, to you, same question. How is the White House responding to the Supreme Court's decision today?
Lindsay, the campaign is turning this right back to Donald Trump. In fact, their entire statement in response to the Supreme Court ruling regarding January 6th is about Trump, reading that violent insurrectionists and those who encourage them must be held accountable, but Donald Trump thinks otherwise. Just last night, Trump again defended January 6th and the insurrectionists who violently assaulted law enforcement officers and tried to prevent the peaceful transfer of power. The statement goes on to say that today's ruling does not change the fundamental truth. They say that Donald Trump will always put himself over democracy. So they're really trying to shine light on Trump's involvement, just as the president tried to do last night when this came up. But of course, we saw a very rehearsed Donald Trump, even though he said he did not practice. He had an answer in the can ready to fire off when this topic came up, and he tried to turn the conversation toward everything except the assault that we saw on the Capitol, talking about everything else that was going on January 6th, except for the riot. So that is what the campaign is saying today in response to this very significant ruling.
And Weijia, let's talk about President Biden's performance. We have a new reaction from Congressman Jim Clyburn, who essentially said to Democrats to stay the course, said that was strike one. If this were a ball game, he's got two more swings. We know how crucial Clyburn was to President Biden clinching the nomination in his first run for the presidency. What are Biden aides telling you publicly and privately?
So privately, Lindsay, they acknowledge that this was a really bad night for President Biden. In fact, publicly, they are saying that as well. And I have talked to sources who are really frustrated about the fact that Democrats, not Clyburn, but others in their own party, are now publicly questioning whether Biden should be the nominee. They agree that they just need to stay the course. They say there are no intentions for the president to pull out. In fact, we just confirmed that Biden is committed to the debate in September if it happens. And so they are trying to look ahead. They are making the case that voters are as well, that they're not just going to focus on one night, that they will look at his presidency and his efforts over time. Of course, it's undeniable what everybody saw yesterday, which raised many questions about the president's fitness. But I think what's really interesting, Lindsay, is that when we look at the president after the debate, when he was greeting voters, when he stopped at a debate watch party, when he arrived here on the tarmac in Atlanta, he was extremely energetic and vibrant, and it was almost like a different person. And aides tell me that's because, you know, it's hard being on the debate stage, and that the environment, you know, drives the president's energy. And so they're trying to chalk this up as a bad night, but of course we'll see if that's enough to explain what we witnessed yesterday.
Weijia Jiang, thank you so much.